I did watch Bitcoin go from $3 to 1,000. And imagine in our index, if there is no difference in the exchange rate.
But the problem with this kind of system is that it is very easy to manipulate because it is based on Web 2 at the end of the day. Hi, Jordan. Welcome to What Are You Tokenizing? How are you today?
Fantastic. How about yourself?
I'm doing good as well. Just for a little bit of context, where are you currently calling from?
I'm in Boynton Beach, Florida. And for those of you
Oh,
that don't know where Florida is in the United States, if you don't know where Boynton Beach is, it's an hour north of Miami, 45 minutes north of Fort Lauderdale. Um, if you know where Trump is in Palm Beach, we're 25 minutes south of there.
amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for those details. I'm trying to visualize how it would have, the kind of scenario it would have been outside of window right now. I'm pretty sure it's looking pretty out there.
It's beautiful.
Amazing. So before we get into the podcast and specific questions that I have, I would love for you to give a brief introduction about yourself, your experience, so that the audience knows and they can what kind of information they can expect from this.
So quickly about myself, I was a real estate guy for many years, and I experienced the conditions of a movie called The Big Short. I don't know how many people in your audience have seen the movie The Big Short, but what happened in the 2000s, like 2005, 6, and 7, is that in the market was flooded with money. We were printing money like crazy, and it caused real estate prices to go wildly up. And I was watching this, and at the time, I was buying and selling properties. And for an example, I was buying vacant brownstones in Harlem. These were vacant, dilapidated buildings that needed really professionals to bring them to market. And that's what I was doing. I would go through the stages of vacating the buildings. Usually there was indigent squatters in there, and it was kind of a hands-on job. You couldn't be a part-time person coming in and say, hey, I'm going to go renovate a brownstone. And so I tell you all of this because I would vacate them, sell the brownstones, and I was making a very good living. I was buying them at the time for $350,000. They went up to $1 million in 1 year. And I was like, what is going on? And I realized, by diving deep into the financial system, how their money was just flooding the market, and banks basically needed to move the money. And so any standard operating procedures were cast aside, and that included like underwriting of loans, where normally you had to qualify for a loan, and they just didn't care anymore. They just gave loans to anybody, and the appraisals were false, and it was really alarming. And the prices again went up from $350,000 to $1 million. And at that point, I wanted to print my own money because, as I said, I did a deep dive into the financial system, and these banks are really private entities, and so I should have every right to print my own money too. And that led me into commodities, oil and gas, and living out in Colorado for a while. I'm from New York originally, and all this happened in New York. And then eventually I was living down in Chile, and I got into, like I said, into commodities because this was all prior to the blockchain and the ability for people to actually create their own money. And while I was living in Chile, I did watch Bitcoin go from $3 to 1,000. With the banking system, I was not allowed to have a bank account because I was not a resident or a citizen of that country. And then I couldn't sign any of my corporate documents. I had a mine down there. It was a copper and gold mine down in Chile. And so I had to have a general manager. And to do something very simple, for example, like transfer money from the United States to Chile, it oftentimes took a week. And, in my mind, I'm like, I'm paying this crazy transfer fee. It's like $400 per $1,000 for $10,000. Plus they're robbing me on the exchange rates. and they're giving me horrible service on top of it. Like it took a week, so something that should take a little bit of time. And so, and now starting to understand Bitcoin and understanding tokenization, which I was fortunate enough that somebody walked into my office in Chile and explained to me what tokenization was. I sort of understood. I understood what Bitcoin was at the time. So this is probably 8 years ago, and I vowed to myself that I was going to get into the industry. And my idea, and I've been working on it since, was the tokenization of direct trade, or the tokenization of, in the United States, we call it bartering. And barter exchanges started in the United States about 55 years ago. They've always had their own virtual currencies. They have inventories of items, both very opaque because you have this centralized, closed management to these barter exchanges that eventually fall into the same categories of banks, which is profits before ethics and morals. And so I saw the blockchain as an opportunity to clean that up, and with technology to remove a lot of the friction of direct trade. And so that's what I've been working on since. And I got involved in a project called Item Bank, which was not a blockchain project until I encountered it. And that was it's about 7 years ago now. So that's a little background on myself and where I am today.
Amazing, amazing. So, to be very frank, Jordan, it's not every day you meet someone who face the challenges, who firsthand experience the shortcomings of the ecosystem, and then decided to do something about it, and then go to the best technology out there to solve it, right? So it's really
That was
great
not
to.
me. I fell into this all, and in the technical world, there's something called composability, right, which is
Yes.
typically applied to taking technologies and putting them together to solve a problem. But I was also able to look at the technology, and honestly, to me, it was very clear that if you took the technology and coupled it with societal problems, some of the ones I'm mentioning, you could solve these problems. So I never thought I would be that guy until now. So
No,
it's a
so
great thing to feel.
I can tell you something. Obviously, you are a bit far in this journey. I've just started, but I came across this concept called social entrepreneurship, and it's exactly what it is. Right? You have to use technology. You have to run a business, but it's not necessary to do it on the cost of others. On the contrary, you can do it while making a change in the society, right? Impact investment, impact startups, and social entrepreneurship. It all combines into one thing that use technology for what it was built on. And I believe what you have faced, right? The delays in transactions, the high cost of transactions, the friction, the difficulty, the lack of transparency, that all is not just what you faced, it's what we faced every day in all the areas that we have, not just finance as well, right? And I believe that's also a movement that convinced you maybe tokenizing inventories is more important than just currencies, right?
The last thing you said was tokenizing what?
Inventories
Yes, is what? Is more important than currency?
is more important than currencies altogether.
Well, actually, it becomes a currency. And, just there's many layers to what I'm working on, but ultimately, I'll get to the very end first. Ultimately, we foresee a Bangladesh t-shirt manufacturer where, let's say, they have tokenized their inventories, and for this example, every t-shirt equals one token. Will go to the Japanese truck manufacturer,
Mhm.
right? I'm sorry, the Bangladesh t-shirt manufacturer will go to the Japanese truck manufacturer and say, I'm going to give you 1 million t-shirt tokens for 2 trucks. And this truck manufacturer will take out their AI agent and say, look, we're going to keep 50,000 of them. We'll make them into our uniform, put our logo on them. We'll give them away as gifts. We have 950,000 tokens. We need the following items. Let's say some special little plastic item. And the AI agent will go out and find that item for them, and they'll trade those t-shirt tokens for that item. But unbeknownst to them, the truck manufacturer, there's like 10 other counterparties behind that trade. All they know really is that they're getting the item that they want. And this is not possible without the blockchain, without
Amazing.
tokenization, and without AI. And so that's removing friction is removing, I mean, imagine if you actually remove the necessity for a medium of exchange. That is a lot of friction that's being removed. But that's down the road, and is what I'm working on is many other steps before that. But it's
Amazing. No,
yeah.
see, uh, what you said is actually something that a lot of us realize along the way. It's not a new concept to tokenize something that has existed for a long time, but it was not feasible, it was not actionable, and blockchain made it more feasible. With blockchain you can tokenize with 100% certainty that this is going to work, right? And it's not going to have that challenges anymore,
But
right?
even with the fact that we were able to tokenize things for some time, there was still a lot of lack of functionability, and we're still facing some of these issues, but they are really starting to clear up now. And now we have also the attention of the largest institutional players in the world involved in the industry, so they are going to clear up. And I just give one example would be interoperability. And we have sequestered, siloed economic systems in each individual blockchain. And that issue needs to be resolved. It still does, but it's well on its way now to being resolved. And there's other issues, regulatory issues, that goes on and on. But the market itself, it's taken some time to mature. And like when I first had these ideas, when I first learned about tokenization, there was no even terminology for it. There was no vocabulary for doing the things I wanted to do. So I was explaining it in layman terms. But as time goes on, there's now a vocabulary such as real world asset tokenization.
Yes, yeah.
7 years ago, nobody said that. And yeah, and so it's made everybody. It's easier for people to understand. Also, with the big players behind it, it's easier for people to believe in it. And like I mentioned earlier, I was in a gold mining business, and I wanted to tokenize gold. And I said, "Well, that's the perfect money because I could send you gold right now in India, and I'm in the United States. That's perfect." And everybody
Absolutely.
looked at me like I was missing the boat. I'm like, they looked at me like, look, because at the time there were three currencies basically that had liquidity and were doing, that were appreciating kind of wildly, which was Bitcoin, Ethereum, and it was Dash at the time. And they're like, if one token equals 1 ounce of gold, how is that going to become $1 million? And I'm like, but it's not the point. And at the time, everybody was only interested in speculation. So it's taken time. That's all for this all to evolve.
No, absolutely. And I think while it's taking time to evolve, your LinkedIn handle is going to become more relevant to these people. It literally says J tokens, right? So I think that becomes more relevant to people as well.
Yes, and it's exciting to watch this evolve and to watch people, um, you know, participate in it and understand it, and it's exciting to watch the technologies being used or invested in, not just for speculation, but for the actual, I believe, the real purpose of them for the utility to mankind. So that is part. It's very exciting to see.
Is there a story behind that nickname J tokens?
Oh no. Yeah, so J Tokens is like my handle on LinkedIn, and on Telegram I'm JG Tokens. If anybody ever wants to reach out to me, but that is, I just saw tokenization as for me, it's all I focused on. like I did not invest too much in speculation. I had friends of mine make a lot of money in it. I had watched friends lose money too in the speculation aspect of it.
We all have.
And again, most of the people participating in it, they kind of look at me a little bit funny, like, you know all this about crypto, you're in this industry, why are you not, investing in it? Why you're not staking? Why you're not? Because to me, it's not um, where I wanted to put my energy. I want to put my energy where I have the opportunity, I do believe, to deliver to the market, and it's one of probably the first time in my life where I felt this way, something that could really change how humans interact, how value is exchanged, and that's what excites me. So that's what I worked on. It doesn't honestly excite me. I mean, I want to make a lot of money. I'm not like everybody else, but it doesn't excite me to gamble that much, and it doesn't excite me to uh, certainly to do something that would be harmful to another person. And so this is what always, you know, got my adrenaline going, and it still does after these years. And I've only taken baby steps each year, and so I feel it gaining momentum, and so it's just so exciting to me. And in watching, like for example, the financial markets right now are being tokenized right in front of our eyes. Money market funds are being tokenized. BlackRock is discussing tokenize the stock market. I mean, this is the steps that had to occur before what I'm doing is going to succeed, even though maybe didn't want to admit it, but it makes sense now in retrospect. And so these are like, this is like the big paradigm change right now that's going to flood the market. And how to go through these different steps where technology evolved, where people's mindsets were, okay, this is got to be now really used. We're not going to do these speculative moves, or as we say in crypto, a lot of times are rug pulls. Now, all this stuff is all nonsense, and people are sick of it at this point, and they want results now. They want real results. How is this going to change our society? And so that's where I think we're at that point right now, and that is what keeps me going. That's for sure.
Amazing, amazing. That's really motivating as well. I'll tell you a brief about one of the projects that I'm working on right now. It's cooperative societies. You might be familiar with them already, but people don't know that much. Cooperative societies are one of the bedrocks of our nations, and in India they are big. Amul is one of the classic examples of how people can come together and create a fair economy using a cooperative society. I have been helping a cooperative society in building a blockchain based governance and tokenization model, how they can automate their improvement process and tokenize that easily. And what you are saying aligns perfectly in that regards. Regarding that, I have one particular question. So while there are many possible, motives behind implementing blockchain and tokenization, what is that one biggest blind spot in today's economy that you feel like leaves farmers, distributors, or consumers most exposed, and that one blind spot that blockchain and tokenization can easily solve?
Well, the it can offer transparency, which is very important, obviously. Um, in addition to that, not to pick on the old system, right, which is easy to do, by the way. There's many shortfalls of it. Just the advances in technology itself. Um, we can do things that we're not capable of before. And so, like one of the things that we're doing with our project is we're creating a valuation engine. So we do this by using indexes of basic human needs as a base of value. The value should be predicated basically on gold or silver, because virtually every economy, everywhere in the world, every culture, every country, every people that I know of anyway, accepts gold and silver as real value and as money. And yet they're very manipulated under this current system. So it's also, they're only one item too, which many people just don't have gold or silver. especially in the United States. And if you're in India and there's a premium gold ownership in India, that's much different than the United States. Right? Indians own a lot of jewelry, and but they own it because that's not really. No, I'm missing that. I thought culturally that's something that Asians and in particular Indians, uh, were maybe they don't have the gold, but they would desire it. Okay. In the United States, many people don't even really, they have a desire for it. They don't even know why. They have the desire for it for the bling more than the value, pretty much. But, in creating these indexes, which we're using the blockchain, we're using AI to determine and derive valuations. So anything that trades against the index or any of the items in the index, we can extrapolate the value for that in a much better way than is being done today. Today, several times a year in the United States, I don't know in India if they do this and elsewhere, but it is used around the world. It's called the Big Mac Index. Have you heard of that? The Big Mac Index? You're on mute. So the Big Mac Index is using McDonald's Big Mac as a barometer of value
Yes.
to determine the purchasing power of items. And, it's not completely faulty. They use the Big Mac because in it is 7 different ingredients, and it's sold around the world. And so they're able to use it and say a Big Mac costs $2 in the United States, and it costs 3 pesos in Mexico. And then they say, hey, therefore, $2 equals 3 pesos. And it's rather rudimentary that it's done. The exchange rates are being calculated like this. So in doing what we're doing, for example, is I believe, and it's a much more accurate way of determining or deriving valuations. And those, we call it relative valuations because even what we're doing, it's not perfect. And so, that is information that one can have today. One can see the exchange rate changing, what we're doing, prior to the exchange rate actually changing. And so if you have that information now, that's just knowledge, just transparency. It's using the technology. It's just one example. You can get out of, let's say, all of a sudden it costs now 4 Mexican pesos to buy that Big Mac. Well, before it goes to that point, you're seeing that because we're using an index of many different items, you can start to see that change happening, and you're realizing that the Mexican peso is being devalued. Or in the case of using one item, imagine in our index, if there is no difference in the exchange rate, items, which is clothing, food, everyday paper like toilet paper, writing paper, shelter, these basic items. If we're using 100 of them and they don't change, but the Big Mac price does change, the chances are the Mexican peso is not being devalued, and something's going on with the price of Big Mac.
Yes.
Like McDonald's workers went on strike, or there's a problem with beef in Mexico, and then they have to import beef or some odd thing. And so by using one different item, something really strange occurs, and it does occur from time to time. The whole market isn't thrown into chaos. You can see, it clearer, and that's why we derive better valuations. So this is
100%.
just one
I
example.
believe. Sorry, you were saying?
No, I was just going to say this is just one example of a problem that these technologies offer to solve or to do better.
100%. And what happens is, I'll take a similar example. Let's say, for example, there was an unexpected rain in the neighboring areas of my home. I know a lot of agricultural fields got destroyed, right? Uh, because of that, the wheat supply reduced, and because the supply reduced, the wheat that was already there in the market, its price increased. Now when I see my friends going to buy wheat in the market, and they get smaller amounts of wheat for a similar money that they used to pay before, they will start thinking, okay, money is devaluing very fast, we need to have dollars, we can't depend on rupees anymore. And I've seen many even panicking and just opening a USD account right away. Okay, I'm going to keep my money in dollars now. And wheat might be one example. Buying a car, buying a electric vehicle, same theory, right? If it becomes expensive because of some other factor, they do not understand the market, and that's primarily because of transparency as well. So I understand the blind spot that you mentioned. Transparency is one thing that is disturbing all the three factors: farmers, economies, and consumers altogether. It has no true friend, I'll say. If transparency is not there, everyone is facing consequences, right? But so, Jordan, I would love to understand the process, how you do this. Like, take us through an example. How does a shop owner turn, let's say, 500 bags of rice into a digital counterpart? How does that
Into
happen?
into a what?
Into a digital counterpart in any currency. How does that happen?
Well, I mean, the project doesn't start there. And that's some time away, right? The project starts now, where we're tokenizing businesses' inventories. The purpose, though, of tokenizing the inventories today is to take advantage of Web3. And Web3 is actually rather inexpensive as compared to Web2. And so the larger companies, they like Web2 right now because they have Web2 where they want it, right? They own Web2. So I don't know if your audience knows Home Depot and Lowe's in the United States, but those are two very large chains of basically hardware stores. They sell tools. They're also florists. So they become like this conglomerate. And so if you're like a smaller hardware store in the United States and probably anywhere in the world, there's probably other different chains, you can't compete with them because they have on Web2, the algorithms are favored to them. So when someone does a search, they show up. They have the capital to spend on SEO rankings. So their website's at the top.
Yes.
Your website's on page 2 or 3, and no one sees it. And then they also have the ability to spend money to advertise, for example, whether it's classified ads or online ads on Facebook or on Google or wherever. And so a smaller player in the market is, it's just not visible.
Yes.
But, going on to Web3, all data is equal. And so the only thing that a larger entity could do is just continue to put more and more data on there. But when someone does a search, it's all equal. And so there is no SEO rankings or algorithms or stuff of that nature that can come up and push you to the bottom. And so we're using Web3 as a form of marketing. And these characteristics I talk about Web3, I think are talked about often, but I haven't really seen them being used in this particular manner so much yet. And so that also shows you how much in the infancy we are in this whole paradigm shift. Because it's been about, I would say, probably 3 years now, people are talking about these characteristics of Web3. And I don't really see it being implemented so much, but I think it's coming now. And so we believe now that more and more businesses will tokenize their inventories. Right now, for example, a token costs 10 American dollars on Solana blockchain. That token remains there forever. It's we call it a billboard on a blockchain. It's like a sign on a blockchain. And being from my real estate background, I used to hang a sign on the building, and it was very, very cost-effective way of advertising. Stayed there for years. I got phone calls for years off of that sign. Well, the same thing would happen here, and it's still in a very, like I said, it's in its infancy. So if somebody, for example, tokenizes on Solana for $10, and people are tokenizing elsewhere, it's still disparate ecosystems, and so that will be resolved. We'd like to build a platform that will take those tokens from all over the place that are using a protocol that we have. It's called the item bank protocol, which I'll get into in a second, and put them all on one platform so that the tokens can be found by humans and also by AI to do the things I mentioned. And then I believe as time goes on, this will probably take a couple of years. I'm forecasting. I don't, it's an opinion before it reaches a crescendo where so many people are actually tokenizing their inventories that they're tokenizing, again, their inventories in general. So if I'm a hardware store and I'm selling a tool like a wrench, and I have 1,000 of them, that token represents all 1,000 of them. It may represent the price individually, but it represents the group. And it doesn't represent the ownership. It just represents what I have for sale. And in the metadata will be a description, the contact of the seller, whoever that may be, whether it's a merchant or actually the manufacturer, and et cetera, et cetera. And also, as I mentioned, we have a protocol, and it's like will help index all these different items so they can be found. An AI agent can do a search and find it, or a human can type in something and find it. So, it's just going to take steps, I think, to reach where the token represents the ownership. And then at that point, when a token represents the ownership of a particular item, you can start to trade that item. Or if you are a country or a city or whatever it may be, and you have all these items tokenized, it's very tidy. You can go to a financier and say, we need money against this inventory. So there's a whole host or menu, I should say, of advantages that tokenization will bring out, whether, again, it comes from financing or collateralizing something or, using it in direct trade itself. And I'm sure there's ideas that I haven't thought of that will come up and, will utilize
Amazing.
these technologies in a way that, we're setting out to use them. They'll think of other ways of actually benefiting from them.
100%. I totally agree with you on that point. Specifically, I touch upon something you said for the audience. Uh, you mentioned that Web2 technologies can be manipulated, they can be owned by organizations. That's why they do not like Web3. And you chose SU as an example, right? A small time seller doesn't get that opportunity to be visible, let alone selling later on. So I tell you an example. Indian government did something to counter that. Indian government created their own platform where you get recommendation on a particular product based on your location. For example, if I want to buy, let's say, kiwis, I will get recommendation who is selling kiwi near my area, and then those recommendations will come in the order of increase of value. Like the lowest value will come first, then it will go in value later on. So even the smallest vendor is visible. It's the choice of the consumer. If he wants, let's say, an expensive kiwi of a different kind, he can go and search and then find out accordingly. But the visibility part is sorted for the smaller farmer or the smaller vendor. But the problem with this kind of system is that it is very easy to manipulate.
Very what?
Again, this very easy to manipulate because it is based on Web 2 at the end of the day. A tokenized or a circular economy or a fair economy, it can never be achieved without blockchain or tokenization, right? So
Yeah.
I can see what you mean, what you said. I can see that in action, and I can compare it with the latest Web 2 efforts of building similar model, which will not work without blockchain.
So even on Web3, there becomes points of fear of misinformation. And so one of the things that we do is we have what we call validators. These are humans that go out and they can go and they can provide prices to us on different items. And in particular, and again, this is in the future, but this is what we're working on. And in particular, we want the pricing of those index items, the basic human need items. And so for providing information, the validator would get a token.
Yep.
Okay. So they get a token. They provide raw data, they get a token. Then we derive valuations, and they can then redeem that token for the derived valuations. And then there'll be a secondary market for that information. So, for example, we had a paper manufacturer in South Africa saying to us, look, we need the data that you're going to put together. We need it very badly because the paper market where he's located in South Africa is like so fragmented where a couple hour direction drive paper is double the value of somewhere else. And so we would love that information. We'll give you a credit for paper, they'll give us a paper token for that information. And so, it's just an example of who might want that. So he's able to go to Botswana from South Africa. It's a small drive, and sell paper for a lot more money. If he knows that, if he has the data for that. That's just one use of how a manufacturer might use what we're putting together.
So, how do you enforce the accuracy in this case about the data that the validators provide?
The accuracy exactly of what?
Accuracy of the data that the validators provide.
Well, I was just saying that's one of the functions of the validators to do would be to actually go ahead and to make sure that maybe AI hasn't gone crazy and deciding to do something that we don't want done. But the AI itself can, through algorithms, rid of outlier data. And we're working on such a wide base of data to derive valuations that there's plenty of mistakes that will be made. So, for example, when you determine the value of coffee, and let's say you go to Guatemala, how much is Guatemalan coffee? Okay, well, they average it all out. So you have the coffee that fell on the factory floor that is leftover coffee, and they package that up and they sell it in bulk, and it's the cheapest coffee. And then they average it out with all the other coffees, including the coffee grown in the pristine mountains of Guatemala in this, organic fashion, and that's very expensive. And you just average it out, and that's the price of coffee in Guatemala. And then if you take that and do that in every country around the world and average that out, well, you get the average price of coffee around the world. So what we're doing now is we're doing that with indexes, right? And we're taking items that have not been commoditized. We do use coffee as one of our basic human need items. And actually, coffee was the foundation of this particular project because it was derived out of Jamaican coffee trade, which
I
we made. We
I
made it.
I have three coffee mugs along with me right now, so I am the biggest fan of this conversation.
Um, but again, coffee is just one of, let's say, 100 items. So you would take a T-shirt and do the same thing with a T-shirt. You would take, the finest hemp bamboo blend T-shirt and average that out with a polyester T-shirt that's made, and that's the average price of a T-shirt in a particular country. And then you do that around the world. That's the average price of a T-shirt around the world. Well, as you do that with indexes, and you have an index can be anywhere, but the logical thing is for it to be done by country by country. So you take every country's index and then average that out, and that's your base value for the world. That's your base value for the world. So you have currently, for example, people are excited, and they should be, about stablecoins. But stablecoins are ultimately based on a fiat currency that is going up usually in the amount of that is in circulation. In other words, they're being devalued, and it's a constant. And so that is our base value that they're going to make for trade, right? Like it is currently like dollars, right? Except now they're tokenized. So we feel we even have a better base of value than dollars, which we believe are faulty, and even of gold, which was manipulated, silver is manipulated. And so that's where the base of value comes in. And that's where, there are going to be a lot of mistakes made, but they average out. And with the AI, it takes out the maybe a couple of the lowest priced items, like saying coffee, a couple of the highest price. Then you have the validators validating the pricing also. And between that, it's pretty accurate. Nothing's perfect.
That's an interesting perspective of how to view things, right? Making out an average, because uh, while we are, so I believe it's in a sense the right way to uh, break down the siloed world, break down the walls, right? So I know for a fact when I do an event, I get t-shirts printed. Same t-shirt, same quality, people are, charging exponentially high in some cases. But and that's the kind of transparency we need. And you chose a very great example, stablecoin. That shows that only one problem being solved has such a big impact on the society. Stable coins is just solving one problem. Going back to your challenges that you faced in your earlier part of life, when you were facing high cost transaction charges and very low speed of transaction, that is the only case that stable coins solve. But they do not solve the root problem of transparency and trust in the ecosystem that's there, right? So imagine the impact that can be have if you remove those aspects altogether from the ecosystem.
And also, the system itself is, I mentioned that the blockchain system itself is somewhat siloed, but even in our world economy, it's very siloed. And in bartering, in direct trade, uh, items lose value, right? If they're stored they're in storage for over 1 year, they have zero value. And that is those items get zero value typically because of a lack of information. You don't know where to bring them, where to sell them, what to do. And as I mentioned earlier, the foundation of Iron Bank was on Jamaican coffee. And my partner, her name is Virginia Robinson, and she wrote a book called The Language of Value, which it's a play on words because it gets into what I'm about to talk to you about right now, the value, but it also talks about the language itself. And that's an easy example would be like tuna fish. We call it a can of tuna fish in the United States.
Yes.
In Jamaica, where we're discussing now, they call it a tin of tuna fish. And all around the world, it's different languages. In order for that to be the tokens to be interchangeable and for people to understand it and for the data to be retrieved and used correctly, it needs to be all indexed. And so all these different terminologies need to be included in the metadata, whether it's a tin, a can, or whatever, so that when someone's searching for it, they can be found. But in this example of Jamaican coffee, you mentioned something earlier. Jamaicans, what they would do is they have to sell the coffee to like a middleman, a trader, and then it goes to the United States, and finally it sells. So there's several middlemen. And in general, in the early 2000s and the late 1990s, in the late 1990s when the project was spawned, actually, there was no building going on in the United States. So building supply materials were stagnant and had, like I mentioned earlier, zero value sitting in storage. Jamaicans, on the other hand, had this great coffee, but they were beholden to many middlemen that they had to trade the coffee through. And they also were having a very difficult time with their currency. They have Jamaican dollars, which at the time, one Jamaican dollar, one American dollar equaled 20 Jamaican dollars. So if a Jamaican was paid $1,000, they were getting paid basically 50 US dollars. And the first thing they would do is run to the bank, get out of Jamaican dollars and get into American dollars because of the volatility of these Jamaican dollars, right? And so they didn't have the ability to buy, and they're an island nation, to buy things on the international market. It made it very difficult for the average Jamaican to do it. But in taking the Jamaican coffee and trading it directly for the building supply materials in the United States, the average Jamaican was able to actually get what they needed from the market. And that was it's due a lot to the misinformation of the US dollar, the reserve currency of the world, which began to value these items in the United States at zero. The the mess in Jamaica with their dollars, the volatility of them. And so in putting all this stuff on a blockchain, it wasn't on a blockchain then when she created these trades. They're easier to do. You can see them. An AI agent will set it up. Um, it solves many problems to say the least.
Many problems indeed. 100%, Jordan. Thank you so much for that very relevant example. As I mentioned, even though I don't understand the economics of it, but just the relevance of it to my life, like let's say coffee relevance to my life, these kind of examples make it easier for everyone to understand, to get interested in this, right? I see people taking examples of bonds or other forms of digital assets, which makes it so difficult because you lose interest, while these things have to be so simple that they relate with everyday life of everyone.
In my studies of economics, my head would start to spin. It's like it becomes complex. But the things we're discussing now, they may be new to some people, but they are honestly they're quite simple. It goes out like a lot to supply and demand. It goes to. I'll give you another example how we can use these technologies, right? So you take a case of a natural disaster, and you have an emergency situation, and you have charitable organizations that are going to deliver products to these affected areas. And so, what they typically do is they go, okay, we have 1 million blankets in inventory. Let's get them 1 million blankets. But they don't need 1 million blankets, and you can see very quickly if you have the data by the pricing of an item. So, for example, socks, shoes, and blue jeans are going up in price in that particular area. That's what they need. It is really, for the most part, it's really simple. It's not that complicated, and a lot of the
Right.
system has been made very complicated. And you have people that don't have an interest in it. They just want to like live and function. And all this complex stuff, all these derivatives and all this other nonsense is affecting the average person that has nothing to do with this stuff. And, if we can, now all that stuff can exist, but there should be a way for people to be able to exist without being affected by it if they don't want to be. And so I think that will start to come forward now. Um,
I totally agree, Jordan, and I definitely, being in this industry, I can see that vision happening over some time. As you rightly said, it's our opinion. We cannot say for sure, but we can see it in the future that this is how the world is moving forward. While they explore different ways to create an equal, fair economy, they eventually will have to land on blockchain and crypto only and tokenization only. They cannot create a fair economy without having a decentralized, transparent, trustless environment, and that's definitely where we see the future. Thank you so much for this amazing podcast today, Jordan. I really enjoyed having these visions and these insights. I'm sure our audience would be super thrilled to know in detail how these things happen. It's very interesting how you are doing it. It's I would like to say it's kind of like an alternate economy that's there, that exists there, but it's not being touched, it's not being channelized properly, and that's something you're bringing to life. There are so many more things that I would really love knowing and talking to you about, but considering the time, thank you so much for this podcast today. uh, in the end, one last question. It's a personal curiosity as well. If you get a chance, let's say, to completely tokenize all the assets in one city, to start as a ground zero, to showcase to the world this is how this can happen, right? This is how an economy can run actually. Which city would it be?
it's a great question. Um, I don't have a definitive answer for it, but I'll say this: that we have traction with our project in Nigeria.
Yes.
So maybe Abuja, and I'll tell you Abuja. Why Nigeria? Because it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It has a very young, receptive population. They really um, seem to understand what all these things I'm talking about. And I'm talking to a number of different Nigerians in there of all different backgrounds. Some of them really are not that formally educated, but yet they understand this. So you have this population that is roaring right now. Their economy's roaring. They're young. They're vibrant. So it could be Nigeria, and we're actually starting to have traction there. We have a group of people that are out and tokenizing inventories for for themselves and for the their clients and for the project, and we've been received well there. And it's funny because in the United States, we haven't had that much interest from people, frankly. Um, and then you go to Nigeria, and it's the same opportunity, the same thing, and there's all this interest. And in looking deeper into the demographics of Nigeria, it makes sense. It makes sense it would start there. I'm sure maybe there's a city in India that might be fantastic also. You can let me know maybe that. But I think any city would benefit from it. But the enthusiasm shown by Nigerians in general has been really interesting and
Yeah.
exciting.
Amazing. Definitely an interesting case study. I'll learn and read more about to know more in depth the vision that you have. Again, thank you so much for today's session, Jordan. For our audience, we'll be posting this recording first in the RWA group that Jordan has on LinkedIn. I've been a part of group recently, but I've been connected with Jordan for a long time. I'm following his work for a long time. Really glad to have this opportunity to uh, communicate with the group and have this information channelized to all the people interested in tokenization. Thanks again, Jordan. I wish you a great day ahead.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.